The Lotus and the Grace of Letting Go. Take a deep breath with me, and just for a moment, let the world fall silent. Imagine a lotus flower, delicate, pure, glowing with quiet grace. But here's something we often forget. That flower doesn't bloom from clear water. It rises from the mud, from darkness, from decay. The lotus doesn't resist the dirt, it transforms because of it. And perhaps that's exactly how the soul grows too. Not from comfort, not from always getting what we want, but from moments where we're asked to let go of what we love most, even when every part of our heart is screaming to hold on. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that walking away felt like betrayal, not to them, but to your own longing? That moment right there is where the journey begins. The Buddha once said, "Attachment is the root of suffering." It sounds simple, but when love is involved, it can feel impossible. Because detachment isn't cold, it isn't indifferent. When it comes to someone you truly love, detaching can feel like death, like something sacred inside you is breaking open. But what if that breaking is actually a kind of becoming? What if letting go isn't the end of love, but the moment love transforms into something higher, into compassion, into wisdom, into the courage to set both people free? Real love isn't about clinging, it's about presence. And sometimes presence means knowing when to walk away with an open heart. I want to invite you into a different way of seeing love, not the kind we see in movies, filled with drama, possession, or fairy tale endings, but a love that mirrors the lotus, rising not in spite of pain, but because of it. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to leave, to bow, not out of anger, but from understanding, to walk away, not because the love wasn't real, but because it asked you to forget who you are just to keep it. And that's not love. That's fear disguised in devotion. There's a quiet revolution that happens inside when we choose peace over attachment. When we realize that staying in something that no longer nurtures our soul is not loyalty, it's self-abandonment. Love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes the highest expression of love is to say, "I release you and I return to myself." And that's not giving up, that's waking up. This is not a story about forgetting someone. It's about remembering yourself, the part of you that existed before longing, before loss, before the illusion that love should come with suffering. The lotus reminds us, growth doesn't come from the surface. It comes from the mud. And sometimes the mud we must rise through is the heartbreak of letting go. But if you let it, that heartbreak can cleanse you. It can strip away the need to be needed. It can soften the fear of being alone. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see love not as something you have to chase, but as something that blooms naturally when you are fully present in your truth. So, take another breath. Place your hand on your heart and ask yourself, honestly, am I holding on because of love? Or because I'm afraid of what it means to be without it? That question isn't meant to hurt. It's meant to set you free. Because the moment you stop confusing attachment with love is the moment your soul begins to breathe again. Let that breath be your beginning. Let it be your first step, not away from love, but toward a deeper one. A love rooted in clarity, in courage, in truth. The kind of love that, like the lotus, blooms only when you rise. Stay with me. The journey has just begun. In the next part, we'll explore what happens in the silence after goodbye, and why that silence might be the most sacred teacher of all. Part 1. The Silent Liberation. Sometimes love doesn't end in shouting. It doesn't crash into betrayal or collapse under angry words. Sometimes it just fades, like the final note of a song you didn't realize had ended. There's a kind of heartbreak that isn't loud, it's quiet. It lingers in the silence between two people who once moved in harmony, but now sit in the same room like strangers. Have you ever felt that? No fights, no cruelty, just a slow unraveling. A presence that once felt like home now feels hollow. Eyes that once looked at you with certainty now seem distant, lost in a different world. Not always physically, but spiritually. Their energy drifts toward distractions, toward silence, toward anything but you. And yet, love still persists. And that persistence at first feels noble, but soon it begins to feel like a prison. You keep reaching for what once was, hoping to bring it back. But the more you tighten your grip, the more it slips through your fingers, like trying to hold sand. Have you ever loved someone so deeply you tried to hold on even when everything inside you whispered, "This is already gone"? It's a painful truth. Sometimes holding on is more damaging than letting go. But letting go? That feels like betrayal. Not betrayal of the other person, but betrayal of the part of you that still longs, still hopes, still aches. But here's what no one teaches us. Sometimes the greatest act of love is the one that frees both people. Not out of bitterness, not because the love has died, but because staying would only turn love into suffering. In Buddhism, there's a teaching. When the flower blooms, the bees come uninvited. It doesn't chase, it simply exists. Love, when it is real and whole, doesn't demand. It attracts through presence, not pursuit. But what happens when the bloom fades? When you find yourself waiting, again and again, for affection that no longer comes with joy, only out of habit? You wake up each day hoping something sacred will return. But what once felt like love now feels like fear. Fear of being alone, fear of change, fear of accepting that something beautiful has reached its end. And yet, that moment, the one where you finally see it clearly, becomes the beginning of something else. One day, maybe while standing at the window, maybe while washing your hands, maybe during one of those long, aching silences, you feel it, that it's time. Not because you've stopped loving, but because the love deserves to breathe again. Letting go isn't abandonment. It's the release of the illusion that love must mean staying, no matter the cost. Real love, true love, doesn't cling to being needed. It doesn't grip. It opens. And sometimes opening means walking away, gently, clearly, and without resentment. The world teaches us to chase, to fix, to hold on. But Zen reminds us, there is strength in stillness. There is compassion in release. So if you are standing at the edge of that decision, if your heart is breaking at the thought of leaving someone you still care for deeply, know this. You are not walking away from love. You are walking away from the need to suffer in its name. And that is liberation. And how silence, when truly honored, becomes the sacred ground for rebirth. Stay with me. Part 2. The moment of letting go and transformation. There wasn't a fight. No dramatic goodbye. No shouting down the hallway or slammed doors. Just one bag. One deep breath. One quiet step across a threshold. It's strange, isn't it? How something as simple as walking through a doorway can carry the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. This is how it begins. Not with chaos, but with stillness. Not with anger, but with awareness. You didn't leave because you stopped loving. You left because love had nowhere left to grow. There's a teaching in Zen called Kensho, a sudden glimpse into your true nature. It doesn't always come while meditating in a temple or reading ancient texts. Sometimes it happens in the most ordinary moments. Standing by the window, watching the light shift. Zipping up a bag with hands that tremble but don't hesitate. And in that moment, something becomes clear. that the love you held for another was also a reflection of your longing to return to yourself. You weren't just walking away from them, you were walking away from the version of you that stayed small to keep the peace, the part of you that accepted silence instead of clarity, that mistook self-sacrifice for devotion. We often think leaving means giving up, but what if it's really a return to dignity, to self-respect, to inner alignment? When you stop begging to be seen, when you stop waiting for affection that arrives only out of habit, you begin to see something sacred. The emptiness isn't punishment, it's possibility. Zen teaches that emptiness isn't a void, it's the womb of transformation. It's the space where truth can finally speak, where all the noise fades away and your own voice becomes audible again. Yes, at first it feels hollow. You miss their presence, the routines, even the things that used to frustrate you. There's a strange ache in having no one to text good morning, no familiar rhythm to follow, no name to whisper in your thoughts. But slowly, that emptiness begins to breathe. It becomes a gentle space of becoming. You start to notice things you hadn't in a long time. The way the sunlight lands on your table in the morning, the rhythm of your breath, the simple act of making tea just for you. There's no rush, no checklist to heal, just a quiet returning. Each small act becomes a prayer. Each moment of silence becomes a teacher. And somewhere in that stillness, you realize you're no longer surviving for love. You're starting to live in it. Not because someone else is offering it, but because it's beginning to rise from within you. This is not the end of love. It's the evolution of it. When you stop fighting to hold on, when you release the need to be needed, you make space for something deeper, not louder, not more dramatic, just true. It is in these moments, quiet, trembling, sacred, that transformation takes root. You are not the same person who once waited at the door, hoping they'd finally understand your worth. You are becoming someone new, someone whole, someone free. And it all began with a single step, a quiet goodbye, and the courage to let go with love. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore how silence becomes not an absence, but a mirror, and why facing that silence is the key to rediscovering your own voice. Stay with me. Part 3. Awakening in Solitude. After the goodbye, after the tears, after the silence, there is a moment that most people never talk about. A moment when life doesn't rush in. It doesn't announce its return. It tiptoes back, softly, quietly, like morning light slipping beneath your door. And if you're paying attention, you might feel it. In the way your breath settles deeper into your belly. In the way you begin to hear birds again, not as background noise, but as music. In the simple act of making tea, not for anyone else, but just for you. At first, solitude can feel like emptiness, a blank space, a missing puzzle piece. We're so conditioned to believe that being alone means something's wrong, that if there isn't someone calling, texting, needing us, we must not matter. But here's the truth. Solitude isn't the absence of meaning, it's where you meet it. It's where you start to notice things again, the smell of the morning air, the way your body moves as you stretch, the flicker of candlelight, the space between your thoughts. These details, often overlooked in a distracted life, become sacred. You begin to realize that stillness is not a void, it's a mirror. And in that mirror, something powerful happens. You begin to recognize yourself again. Not the version of you that was constantly giving, constantly pleasing, constantly adjusting just to be enough, but the version that simply exists, that breathes, that listens inward, that is worthy, even in silence. Buddhism speaks of the middle way, a path between extremes. Not clinging, not rejecting, not indulgence, not denial, but a steady walk between, where balance is found. That's what this solitude becomes. You're no longer chasing someone to validate your worth. You're no longer running from the ache of being alone. Instead, you're standing still, rooted, here, now. Can you feel that? The shift from needing to be seen to simply being present. The shift from asking, "Do they love me?" to asking, "Am I loving myself?" Even your daily rituals begin to transform. You cook not just to eat, but to nourish. You go for walks not to distract your mind, but to clear it. You open books not to escape reality, but to understand it more deeply. And suddenly, life slows down, but becomes more alive. Every ordinary moment becomes a meditation. Washing dishes becomes a moment of gratitude. Folding laundry becomes a chance to breathe. Even the act of lighting a candle feels like a conversation with your soul. Have you ever noticed that? That when you stop rushing, life begins to whisper again? It's not always easy. There are moments when the silence feels too loud, when the weight of missing someone returns like a wave, when memories visit unexpectedly, and that's okay. Let them. The point isn't to numb the pain, it's to sit with it gently, to invite it in like an old friend, to listen to what it's trying to teach you. Because real awakening doesn't happen in the noise. It happens in these quiet, honest conversations with yourself. And slowly, something begins to bloom. Love doesn't vanish. It shifts. It softens. It stops clinging and starts breathing. You begin to understand that love doesn't need to hurt to be real. It doesn't need to be proven or chased. It simply flows when you stop damming the river with fear. You are no longer seeking someone to complete you. You are remembering that you were never incomplete. And in that remembering, something sacred returns. You no longer look in the mirror to wonder who you are without them. You look and see someone who stayed when others left. Someone who kept breathing when the world went quiet. Someone who chose presence over performance. This is the awakening in solitude. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow unfolding, but it is real, and it is yours. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this inner shift begins to ripple outward, and why others begin to feel the change, not because you said anything, but because you've stopped needing to be anything other than yourself. See you in the next part. Part 4. When you no longer chase. There comes a moment, so subtle you almost miss it, when something inside you shifts. You stop checking your phone. You stop rehearsing what you'd say if they called. You stop hoping they'll finally understand what you were trying to give them. It's not because you've hardened. It's not because you've stopped caring. It's because something deeper has awakened. Your energy is no longer orbiting around them. You're no longer a satellite to someone else's gravity. This is the kind of transformation that doesn't need to be announced. It simply is. Your presence no longer leans forward in waiting. It stands still in awareness. Have you ever noticed how quiet power feels different from force? You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer feel the urge to explain your worth, to beg for clarity, to ask why. Your silence now speaks louder than any speech could, not as punishment, but as presence. In Zen, there's a teaching that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. What changes isn't the world outside, it's the energy you bring to it. And in this stillness, others begin to feel something they never expected. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. They notice, not because you're trying to make them notice, but because they can no longer feed off your emotional availability. You're not chasing. You're not collapsing. You're simply standing.
And that alone is enough to shake the foundation of every story they once believed about you. The version of you that begged, pleaded, waited endlessly, she's gone. And what replaces her isn't a colder, more distant version. It's someone clearer, calmer, more whole. You might still care deeply. You might still remember the way they smiled, the way your laughter used to echo together. But now you can hold those memories without needing them to return. You can forgive without inviting them back into your life. You can listen without waiting for a different ending. This is what real detachment looks like. Not avoidance, not resentment, but clarity. You don't need to punish anyone. You don't need to disappear in anger. You simply stop needing to be needed. And that alone is powerful. Have you ever felt someone's energy change without them saying a word? They stop leaning in. They stop trying to win you back. And suddenly you feel it. This invisible shift that disrupts everything. You were that person once. Now you are the still point in a spinning world. They may reach out, curiously, cautiously, or even with regret. They may say they've changed. They may want to come back. But something within you has already crossed a threshold. You're not the same person who once craved their presence. And even if they return, you no longer need them to feel complete. That's the difference. That's the freedom. Love has not left you. It's just no longer confused with attachment. It doesn't cling. It doesn't grasp. It gives light without burning the one who holds it. And maybe that's what love was always meant to be. So if you find yourself in that quiet space today, if you're no longer chasing, no longer shrinking, no longer bending to be chosen, know this. You are not disappearing. You are emerging. The stillness they feel from you is not silence. It's the sound of your soul finally standing in its truth. You can love someone deeply and still let go. You can care and still choose peace. You can forgive and still walk forward, alone but never lonely. Because the love you were searching for out there was always waiting for you within. In the next part, we'll explore how peace becomes your new compass and how your stillness becomes the beginning of someone else's awakening. See you in the next chapter.
Part 5. Letting go is awakening. Letting go. It sounds like an ending, but in truth, it's a beginning. Not the kind of beginning you can celebrate with a ribbon or a milestone, but the kind that happens deep within the soul, when something finally says, no more. There comes a moment on every spiritual path when you realize loving someone doesn't mean you have to stay. It doesn't mean enduring endless confusion or pain. It doesn't mean sacrificing your peace just to prove your devotion. Real love isn't a prison. It doesn't tie itself to presence or control. It doesn't say, you must stay so I can feel whole. It says, even if you walk away, I will still honor what we shared. And that is liberation. You begin to understand that leaving isn't always rejection, it's recognition. A quiet knowing that the path you're on can't be walked with someone who doesn't see your soul clearly anymore. Have you ever felt that? That moment when staying felt more like erasing yourself than expressing your love? And yet, we stay. We stay hoping they'll change. We stay because we're afraid to start over. We stay because the story sounds so noble. If I love deeply enough, it will be enough. But here's the truth no one tells you. Staying in a place that breaks your spirit is not love, it's fear. And fear disguised as loyalty is one of the most painful illusions of all. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. But what happens when the attachment isn't to the person, but to the hope that things will one day feel like they used to? This is where awakening begins. When you stop asking, how can I fix this?
and start asking, how much of myself am I willing to lose in the process? Letting go doesn't mean you failed. It means you've remembered. Remembered that your peace matters, that your joy is not a reward someone else gives you. It's your birthright. And yes, leaving hurts. But what hurts more is staying too long in a place that slowly unravels who you are. In Buddhist teachings, there's a truth many overlook. Karma isn't just what we do to others. It's also what we allow to happen to ourselves. When you keep yourself in a relationship, a situation, or a dynamic that wounds you again and again, you are not just accumulating suffering, you are creating karma. Karma doesn't just flow from our actions toward others. It arises from the permission we give to pain. And so, to walk away, to gently, firmly, lovingly say enough, isn't just a boundary, it's a spiritual purification. It's the moment you stop recycling the same patterns, the moment you break the cycle that says, love means I must suffer. Because it doesn't. Love is not meant to cost you your wholeness. Love is not meant to ask you to dim your light just to keep the peace. And if you've been doing that, it's okay. We've all had. We've all mistaken love for endurance, sacrifice, survival. But now, you're waking up. You're beginning to see that true love never asks you to betray yourself. And when it does, when it crosses that line again and again, your choice to leave becomes not an escape, but an elevation. Letting go is not an act of bitterness. It is the seed of wisdom. It is what turns karma into dharma, your sacred path forward. So if you're standing at the edge right now, heart trembling, soul whispering, wondering whether it's time to go, listen, not to the fear, not to the guilt, but to the stillness beneath it all. The part of you that knows, peace is no longer found in their arms. It's waiting in your own. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens on the other side of letting go, when you begin to meet the version of yourself that was buried beneath all the trying. She's been waiting for you, and she's ready to rise. See you soon.
Part 6. Returning to yourself. There's a moment that arrives, slowly, quietly, when you realize something has shifted. Not out there, but in here. You're no longer walking through life trying to prove your worth. You're no longer dressing for their gaze. No longer thinking, will they notice me now? Instead, you're doing things differently because something inside of you finally feels whole. This is the return. The return not to who you were when they loved you, but to who you were before the world told you who to be. In Zen, there's a phrase, the original face. It points to the self before identity, before masks, before we learn to perform for love, to shrink for acceptance, to mold ourselves into what others found palatable. And now, standing in your stillness, you begin to feel it, that original face, calm, spacious, quietly radiant. You move differently. You speak less, but more truthfully. You wear what feels like you, not what's expected, not what's trendy, not what might win someone back. You begin to walk like someone who knows they belong, not because someone else says you do, but because you no longer ask that question. This transformation doesn't require an audience. It doesn't post announcements. It doesn't come with a spotlight. It simply is. And that's what makes it powerful. You've likely been told that healing means becoming stronger. But maybe, just maybe, healing means becoming softer, more attuned, more available to yourself. You're no longer chasing love in the eyes of others. You're offering it inward, not out of loneliness, but out of respect for the sacredness of your being. Have you ever looked in the mirror and, instead of asking, what do they see, you whispered, what do I feel? That is presence. That is awakening.
This isn't about proving that you've moved on. It's not about showing anyone that you're okay. It's about no longer needing to. You no longer look outward for validation. You've turned inward. And in that turning, you've discovered a light that was never lost, only buried. This is what it means to meet yourself again, to sit with your silence and feel comfort, to spend time alone and not feel abandoned, to smile, not because anyone's watching, but because peace has finally come home. Imagine this. You walk into your kitchen in the morning, and instead of scrolling through old messages, you feel the warmth of the mug in your hand. You notice the steam rising from your tea, the sunlight brushing across your shoulder. You take a deep breath. You're not rushing. You're not regretting. You're simply here. And that is enough. You don't need to tell anyone you've changed. They'll feel it, not through your words, but through your energy, through your calm, through your absence of desperation, of striving. Some people may be unsettled by this version of you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've reclaimed the parts of yourself that were once dependent on their presence. You no longer orbit around them. You've become your own gravity. You shine, quietly, softly, like a candle that doesn't need to burn bright to warm a room, like a tree that no longer bends in the wind, but stands rooted, peaceful, unshaken. This is not arrogance. This is not indifference. This is clarity. You are no longer trying to become enough. You are remembering. You already are. In our next chapter, we'll explore why the world begins to respond differently once you stop needing it to validate your worth, and how your stillness becomes an invitation, not a defense. You've returned to yourself. Now, watch what unfolds when you stay there.
Part 7. When they feel your absence. Sometimes, silence is the loudest thing you'll ever speak. It arrives long after the words have faded, long after the questions have gone unanswered. And it doesn't knock. It just lingers. That's the thing about absence. It doesn't beg to be noticed, but it always is. When you stop chasing someone, when you stop orbiting around their needs, their moods, their energy, something in the space between you begins to shift. They feel it. Not immediately, not always with words, but they do feel it. Because presence has a weight, and when it's gone, what remains is not just silence, but reflection. Your absence becomes a mirror, a space they can no longer ignore, a place where their own patterns are suddenly visible, clearer than ever before. Have you ever walked into a room that used to feel warm, only to realize it feels cold now? Not because the temperature changed, but because something sacred is missing? That's what happens when you stop bending to make someone comfortable, when your energy returns to you, when your heart stops leaning. Suddenly, they're no longer comforted by your presence. They're confronted by your absence. And it's not about punishing them. This isn't revenge. This isn't playing games. It's something much deeper, a truth that Zen teaches with such quiet force. The strongest presence is sometimes the one that is no longer there. It's the stillness you now carry. It's the calm in your voice. It's the fact that you're no longer available to be emotionally pulled, pushed, or persuaded. You're not trying to prove your value anymore. You're living it. That version of you who once chased, who once gave everything just to be seen, she no longer exists. And it's not because you stopped loving. It's because you started remembering. Remembering the light inside you that was never meant to flicker in someone else's shadow. You didn't leave to hurt them. You didn't grow so they'd notice. You grew because your soul outgrew the waiting room. And now, in your absence, they're left with the silence you once filled. And silence, in its own way, is a teacher. It holds up a mirror. It whispers, "This is what you lost." Not out of blame,
but out of truth. And maybe they start to see it. They see the patience you brought, the way you listened deeply, the quiet ways you showed up day after day, even when you were running on empty. But now you are full, not because they returned, but because you returned to yourself. This is what love without attachment looks like. It doesn't grasp. It doesn't collapse. It stands still. It forgives. It releases. It reflects. And here's the paradox. When you finally stop needing someone, is often when they begin to feel your value the most. But the version of you that needed their recognition, she's gone. She's been replaced by someone quieter, stronger, someone who doesn't seek validation but embodies it. So, if they reach out, if they call or message or suddenly show interest again, you don't need to rush. You don't need to respond with hope or hurt. You simply breathe. Because you've already done the hardest part. You walked away in love, not in anger. You let go, not to punish, but to remember who you are. And in doing so, you became the light they never expected to lose. Sometimes it takes absence to teach others what your presence really meant. Sometimes the most profound awakening doesn't happen when someone stays, but when you stop waiting for them to. In the next chapter, we'll explore how love, when no longer tied to need, becomes your greatest source of freedom, and how walking away with peace plants seeds of transformation in everyone you leave behind. You're not disappearing. You're becoming whole. See you in the next part.
Part 8. The Final Liberation. There's a kind of freedom that doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, like a breeze you almost didn't notice, until you realized you were breathing easier again. At some point, you stop waiting for the message. You stop holding your breath every time your phone lights up. You stop playing the what-if stories on loop in your mind. And instead, you smile, gently, effortlessly, without needing a reason. This is what final liberation feels like. It doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped clinging. You stopped tying your peace to someone else's presence. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself, to justify your leaving, your silence, your growth. Because here's a truth worth remembering. Love, true love, doesn't require endless explanation. When you're constantly trying to convince someone of your heart, your intention, your worth, it's not love that's speaking, it's fear. Fear wants reassurance. Fear wants clarity. Fear wants a promised future. But love? Real love trusts the unfolding. Real love flows in freedom, not in force. Have you ever noticed how heavy love becomes when it's filled with questions like, do they get it? Did I say too much? Why can't they just see? You deserve a love that doesn't make you doubt yourself. And that kind of love often begins the moment you stop looking for it in someone else and start discovering it within. There's a beautiful teaching in Zen that says, only when the cup is empty can you pour in fresh tea. And perhaps this is the moment you finally put the cup down. You stopped trying to refill it with old stories, old patterns, old hopes. You stopped trying to pour love into someone who was never ready to receive it. And in doing so, you made space. Space for joy, for quiet, for yourself. This is not about forgetting, it's about releasing. Releasing the weight of needing to be chosen. Releasing the belief that love means staying no matter what. Releasing the idea that freedom and love can't exist in the same breath. Because the truth is, they're not opposites, they're twins. Real love doesn't bind you, it liberates you. It doesn't demand your silence or your sacrifice. It invites your truth, your wholeness, your joy. When you step into that space, when you no longer need love to look a certain way, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of everything worked out,
but the deeper peace of knowing that even if it didn't, you did. You chose yourself, not out of ego, but out of reverence. You poured your heart into something. You stayed when it was hard. You tried when it would have been easier to walk. And when the time came, you walked, not in anger, but in awakening. That's not failure. That's freedom. Freedom to laugh again. Freedom to rest. Freedom to no longer be defined by someone else's ability to hold you. You are no longer afraid of empty spaces, because now you know. Emptiness is not a punishment. It's a doorway. It's an invitation. You've emptied the cup, and now life is ready to pour something new. So take a deep breath, not to calm the ache, but to celebrate the clarity. You're not waiting anymore. You're living. You're not afraid of letting go. You've learned to let it teach you. And in that, you've become the very love you once hoped to find. In the next chapter, we'll explore what it means to carry this freedom forward, how to love again without losing yourself, and how to stay open without becoming attached. You're not just healing, you're evolving. And the story isn't over. It's just beginning.
Returning to yourself is the deepest love. There is a kind of love that doesn't demand your presence. It doesn't cling to form or expect you to stay just to make it feel secure. It doesn't say, "Prove it to me." It says, "I see you, even from afar." This is what love becomes, when it is no longer rooted in need. When love matures, it understands space. It respects silence. It lets go of control. You no longer have to be there for it to be real. You don't need to check in, reply quickly, or explain yourself just to be heard. You don't need to keep showing up for someone who's not meeting you there. Because now, you've come home, not to someone else, but to yourself. This whole journey, every ache, every letting go, every quiet night, wasn't about leaving them behind. It was about returning. To your stillness, to your truth, to the soft, steady voice that never left you, even when you couldn't hear it through the noise. This is what it means to truly love yourself. Not through affirmations or self-care routines, but through reverence. The reverence of no longer chasing what hurts you. The reverence of standing still in your worth. The reverence of knowing, if it costs me my peace, it's not love. You are no longer afraid of being alone, because you now know loneliness isn't the absence of someone else. It's the absence of connection to your own soul. And you have remembered that connection. You are no longer begging to be chosen, because you have chosen yourself. Not from pride, not from pain, but from awakening. And here's something many don't realize. Not all walking away is fueled by anger. Some departures are guided by clarity. You didn't leave to make a point. You didn't detach to punish. You didn't grow just to prove that you could. You walked because your spirit whispered, "There's something more honest waiting for you on the other side of this." And that honesty, it led you back to your center. A place where love no longer equals sacrifice. Where presence no longer means losing yourself. Where silence is not emptiness, but sacred space. So, if you've made it here, to this moment of peace, of softness, of return, I invite you to pause. Breathe in. Feel how far you've come, not in miles, but in depth. You are not the person who first broke. You are the one who rebuilt, piece by mindful piece. And now, when their name crosses your mind, it no longer carries weight. It brings gratitude. When you see reminders of them, you no longer ache. You gently smile. Because now you understand. You can love someone and still walk away. You can honor the past without needing it to be your future. You can care without returning.
And in doing so, you have discovered a love that doesn't confine or collapse, a love that doesn't need to be held tightly to be real, a love that begins and ends with you. So, if you're still holding on, ask yourself gently, what am I afraid will happen if I let go? Then listen, not to your fear, but to the deeper voice beneath it, the voice that's already guiding you home. If this journey has resonated with your heart, take a moment to sit with it. Maybe journal, maybe breathe, maybe just look out the window and feel your own presence again. And if you'd like to keep walking this path together, feel free to subscribe to the channel. No pressure, no chase, just gentle reminders that you're not alone on this road back to yourself. I'll be here, quietly, calmly, for the next step. Until then, walk not in anger, but in awakening, and let your footsteps be a prayer.